Welcome to the 2024 Aspen Ideas Climate, a collaboration between the Aspen Institute and the City of Miami Beach. Please use the hashtag Aspen Ideas Climate on social media. Thank you for joining us. As a 501c3, the Aspen Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse, support, or oppose political candidates or parties. To the extent elected officials are present today, they are attending solely in their official capacity and not as political candidates. Further, the views of our guests and speakers do not necessarily reflect those of the Institute. Please remember to turn your mobile devices to silent. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome Alex Heckler.
Good afternoon. It's fortuitous that it's 3:05 and you're in the 3:05. We're glad to have you in Miami. My name is Alex Heckler, and I am humbled to serve as the chair of the host committee to support this amazing event. And thank you for joining us for year 3 of Aspen Ideas Climate in Miami Beach. The event started as a bit of an experiment to see if people from around the world would be willing to endure 3 days in the brutal Miami Beach winter to talk about and take action on climate. And here we are 3 years later. The event has grown in numbers and in stature. This year, we welcomed onto the stage governors, mayors, cabinet secretaries, ministers, scientific experts, innovators, and philanthropists. We heard about a $60 million announcement from Bezos Earth Fund. We hosted over 100 future leaders from all around the world, and we facilitated engaging conversations through breakout sessions and through roundtables. We are very proud of this success, and we are very grateful to those who contributed to this success. First, we want to thank the sponsors of our host committee here in Miami Beach for making this a reality, and you've seen their names posted on placards all around. We want to thank Dan Porterfield and Greg Gershuni from the Aspen Institute, and thank them for curating this incredible program and all the work they and their team do, the amazing team from the Aspen Institute. To Michelle Berger, Veronica Bazzorni, Danielle Mejia, Mike Urente, John Adrabi from LSN Partners, thank you for your tireless efforts in coordinating the logistics of this event. To Mayor Levine Cava and Miami-Dade County, Mayor Minor, and Miami Beach, and Mayor Suarez in Miami, thank you for serving as our host county and our host cities, and for your steadfast commitment to sustainability and resilience. And finally, to you, our attendees and participants, thank you for caring so deeply about our environment, for traveling from all over the world to be part of this conversation, and for coming back on day 3 and staying awake during my remarks. This is a true testament to your commitment and the power of our Miami Cuban coffee, which is hopefully keeping you awake. And if you haven't discovered it, just walk around Lincoln Road behind you, behind the convention center. In closing, it's our hope that the conversations facilitated during these last 3 days will lead to action. And we hope to see you next year as we reconvene here in Miami, as we continue to address our collective future and the realities of our changing climate. Thank you again.
And now, Sherry Pickman.
Good afternoon. I'm a poet, and I've been living in Miami for about a decade now. The 2 poems I've chosen to read for you today explore this sort of tension that exists and comes from living in a place like Miami that's so lush and full of natural beauty and generous and basically a veritable tropical paradise, against the backdrop of the impending threat of climate change, climate disaster, and how those sort of like hopes and horrors collide, coexist, and play out in our day-to-day. The first poem is How to Greet the Spring. The sun was out. The flood came anyway. The sea rose to take the city plinth by plinth. Amaranth bled red into twitching schools of silver buttonwoods. To think what you could have given up. Here, even the gulls are starving. The fishermen are fighting. All the waters of the world are troubled and suspect. The little river, the little God in you who lets you go on each day, is out of its depth. Out of darkness, you reel in dented cans. They empty through rusted stars as the world warms and the rooftops clamor for higher and higher ground. The next poem is titled Resiliency Committee, and I think probably a lot of you here actually already know that that's an actual civil faction in the city of Miami charged with mitigating climate disaster and climate change. And I wrote this poem at a time when there were wildfires raging on the West Coast, and you'll hear that reference in the first line. Resiliency Committee. The people in the fire are sending smoke signals to those awaiting the flood. Historically, some of the stupidest ideas have been ushered forth by great enthusiasm. Levees, pumps strained by the moon's glow or springtime rain. Meanwhile, we forget our vigilance. We forget the threat of mosquitoes whose pestilence predates us and will probably go on ringing in the blood of the next biped beast. We are making plans, in spite of ourselves. We are naming street signs, naming our children. And when the flood comes, might we find it more peaceful than we'd anticipated, rising as if to greet us. Thanks.
And now, Jake Barton.
Hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. Incredibly inspiring group to be part of, so thank you for having me. When we talk about carbon these days, think about it. It's the #1 impediment to human growth It's the biggest challenge for our future, but this is how we see it, which is actually a huge challenge for humans because, as they say, seeing is believing. So I started thinking to myself, well, what if we could actually see carbon? Right? We lost the evolutionary lottery. We can't actually sense it. But if we could, it might look something like this. And I started making other images about imagining carbon at its very source. Right? What if you could actually see, in some distant future, where these emissions are actually coming from so we could stop them? And what if in that future we could actually tell people today what it is that they need to do to make that future better? Now, my background is actually in museum experience design. The firm that I built designed the 9/11 Memorial Museum. I spent 8 years on this project. Planet Word, a new museum of words and languages in Washington, D.C., filled with wonder and new technologies. We have lots of projects that deal with play in interesting ways. This we built for Manchester United in China. It's a new immersive play experience concept that we're going to be applying to climate. Or this project, Greenwood Rising, which is the Tulsa Race Massacre Museum. And as part of this project in particular, we started thinking about what's often called the call to action. Right? This is the moment at the end where, having seen something and felt something and been moved to action, we're able to wind people up and sort of point them in a direction of where to make productive use of that energy. And in this case, because people are adding their own message, they're actually able to make more impact. Now, this is particularly important now that I'm starting to do self-initiated projects around climate because of this strange fact. So this is the IRA, this is the so-called climate bill, our big opportunity to decarbonize America. But it's a little weird if you followed it, right? The estimates are anywhere from 300 billion to 1.2 trillion. And that is really strange and unusual. But that's specifically because tax credits and grants require voluntary adoption. So when you let that sink in, you start to recognize that every school, every hospital, every business, every church, every local government is going to have to voluntarily decarbonize. Right? They're going to have to raise their hand and say, yes, I want to do the work, and yes, I also want to put in the additional money to make that happen. Now, we have some theories on how that happens. This is the so-called adoption curve that's very famous in Silicon Valley. And when you look at it, these folks here, the early adopters, which is frankly all of us, the climate folks, we have been reached by the messaging thus far. We've maybe calculated our carbon footprint or been galvanized into action. That said, these folks are the ones we need to actually reach now. Right? This is the early majority. This is my audience that I'm hoping to touch on. Now, when you talk to behavioral scientists, there are two things you need to do in order for people to change behavior. Number one is the big why. Why should I make change? Right? And when you look at this, these are the folks that we're trying to reach, and they're starting to get onto the why, as you can see here. 2/3 of them, the majority of America, are already worried about climate. The problem is they don't talk about it, and they definitely don't do anything about it. Now, the why has already been achieved because of this: extreme weather. Right? Inconvenient Truth tried to convince us this was going to happen, and now, this is just a couple months ago in my native New York, it's real. Everyone knows it's real. The second thing that they tell you is that you need a path to what's called efficacy. You need to have a change that will actually make impact. And honestly, I think that is where we have fallen down. Because when we Google in the middle of the night because the sky is orange or because the mudslides have taken something precious from us, the top 10 hits are all carbon footprint. This is you as an individual and you as a consumer. And so what I started doing was gathering together all the things that you can do as members of communities, changing the systems that you're part of, right? So this is all of these different Google searches, drawdown labs, PDFs that I personally and a bunch of people have made our way through. So these are the 6 things you would actually do to decarbonize K through 12 schools. And then we also gathered together case studies of individuals who have made changes around that. Plus, we have a chatbot where you can put in a paragraph about yourself, and it'll pull out all the categories where you can make change. Once you make a commitment to change, you can then step into the future. So this is an immersive experience that we've been prototyping at my studio in Lower Manhattan. And when you step into the future, it's not a good future or a bad future, and this is another cognitive blind spot we're trying to seal. It's a conditional future. It can be different depending on our actions. And as more people take actions, the temperature gets lower, and the future gets better. So the idea is to build these, partner with different venues or different locations, different maybe corporations or businesses or local governments, cities or individual counties, places that want to catalyze action and draw attention to the productive things that we can all do, whether it's policies, whether it's new ways of working together, whether it's, again, changing our schools or universities or hospitals. All of these systems need to galvanize both their customers as well as their constituents in order to take action to start this decarbonization process on a mass scale. And that's really what this is trying to do, is make this emotional moment of attention that can then bring forward all the changes themselves. This is a much lower fi version. This we actually launched at the Coal and Ice Show in New York City at the Asia Society. So it has all of these different cards for the different communities that you can be part of. Right, so when you look at it, this is hospitals, for example. I made my way through 200 pages of a National Academy of Sciences deck to pull out these 11 points, right? Or whether it's agriculture, or whether it's procurement, or whether it is creative arts, or whether it's indigenous communities, or whether it's mangroves. The point is there are customized levers just for you in every version of you, where you can make a much, much bigger impact than just you as an individual. Because you can do something within a community, talk about it, share about it, and be proud of it. And particularly, we're looking for partnerships in all of these different locations. So online is free. We'd love to partner with people who want to use this as a call to action for their documentaries or their films, news outlets, public spaces, partnerships, as well as the immersives. But what I find most inspiring is this idea of future makers. So these are the individuals. Again, it's amazing that you all are dedicating your lives to climate, but these are the folks who are not. Right? These are teachers who are not quitting their day jobs. This is an amazing artist here in Miami. Each and every one of us is an artist. Walk away knowing that you're an artist, Xavier Cortada. We really have to, as a union, help teachers, help students respond to the moment. This is Michael Kuzic, obviously in Boston. This is the Reverend Canon Sally J. Bingham. Climate change is probably the most moral issue of our time. Or Glenn Elzingo says, put your heart and soul into the relationship with the landscape. Right now we've lost it, but we can rebuild it. And I'll leave with this final quote, which I actually got from a colleague, Jonathan, from Undaunted K through 12. And this is what I find inspiring most of all about this conference. He was saying, you know, oftentimes people in climate think to themselves, oh, how is it that at this moment I'm watching all of these things crashing around me, all of these things that are so problematic, et cetera. But there's also another way to think about it. Maybe we were born at the right time. Maybe this is actually the exact challenge that we were brought here to together solve. And with that, I will say thank you so much. I appreciate
it. Please welcome Jason Bordoff with Greg Gershuni.
All right, hello, everyone. We've been talking about climate solutions all week. We've been talking about everything from clean energy to natural solutions to forests to the ocean. And today I want to zoom way out and talk about geopolitics and the energy transition. There's no one more expert on this topic than Jason Bordoff, the founding director of the Columbia University Center for Global Energy Policy. And so I want to start with the energy transition. How is the energy transition impacting geopolitics?
Well, first, thanks, Greg and Dan and the whole team at Aspen for having me this year and the collaboration we have over the course of the year. You've run a phenomenal team at the Aspen Institute, and we're really lucky at Columbia to collaborate with Greg and his team on many things around energy and climate. I really enjoyed Jake's talk, and I think some of the comments I would make would build on it in two respects. One, he and I went to middle school together and haven't seen each other since. And I think, if you want to think about things that give you hope, these careers have come full circle now where we're both spending each and every day trying to think about how to solve the climate crisis from totally different perspectives. And what I just saw is phenomenal in what he has spent his career doing. He made a comment about the early adopters, the people who get this problem, the people who are probably in this room right now, and how to bring more people along by helping them understand the severity of the impacts of climate, of extreme weather. I come at that problem from a slightly different standpoint, because my background is in foreign policy and national security and geopolitics. And when we think about the urgency of accelerating a clean energy transition, it is certainly because of the impacts of climate change that we are already seeing and are going to see. It is also because you can build a broader coalition, you can build interest in this when you think about the energy crisis we saw over the last several years, driven by Russia's weaponization of natural gas, and a reminder that as you are dependent on globally traded hydrocarbons inevitably exposed to geopolitical risk, there is messiness to the transition. We can talk about that, but in the long run, a decarbonized energy system is going to be a more energy secure one, as well as a cleaner one. We right now are seeing, to the extent there can be agreement across the aisle, which is difficult on these issues, some of the things that start to build it are thinking about the enormous economic opportunities that are created by the transition, the national security concerns that can come because of competition, particularly in an era of deteriorating relations between the great powers, US and Europe on the one hand and China on the other. There are a host of national security reasons, geostrategic and geoeconomic reasons to accelerate this transition. That's not happening today, to your question, at anywhere near the scale and speed it needs to. And so we're in this moment now of both hope and concern. When you look at, over the last 10 years, by any measure, where we are, 1 in 5 cars sold this year globally will be electric. That's compared to 1 in 20 just a few years ago. Globally, nearly twice as much spent last year on clean energy as spent on fossil fuels. You can sort of go down this list of numbers that are extraordinary with how quickly clean energy is growing. And the only problem is oil use is going up, and gas use is going up, and coal use is going up, and emissions are going up. So two things can both be true at the same time, and we can talk about why that is. And right now, we're in an era that I worry a little bit about, which is we're in an era of war and conflict globally that sap attention and resources from the transition. We're in an era of this great power competition that can, if not managed, slow the pace of clean energy adoption. We're in an era of populism and right-wing parties on the rise around the world in a year where half the global population is going to vote in elections. So some of the worrisome geopolitical trends we're seeing are complicating the energy transition. And if we're not careful about how we go about this clean energy transition, a messy, disorderly transition can worsen some of those same geopolitical forces. And that is a downward spiral that we have to be conscious of and reverse, because it is reversible.
And on that downward spiral, geopolitics impacting the energy transition impacting geopolitics. How do we get out of that tailspin, and how do we, reverse it and be able to get those two things to have a positive correlation with each other?
Yeah, I think the first way is to identify what challenges we're trying to address. And so again, right now you see the rise of populism, you see economic fragmentation globally, you see a pushback to the perceived or real costs of the transition. In the United States, 38% of people surveyed said that they would pay $1 per month for climate change, whatever we define that. That number is down 14 percentage points from 2021. In an era of rising inflation and economic concerns, the political support for stronger climate action, sometimes clean energy is cheaper, but not always. There is a cost. It's lower than the cost of not having a transition and suffering the impacts of climate. So we need to identify what some of those geopolitical challenges are today. And then as we think about the way in which we're going about this transition, a major motivating force for, say, the Inflation Reduction Act, we just heard about, a historic piece of climate legislation with so much opportunity. It is not just climate action, it's industrial policy. It is an effort to build a stronger domestic economy, to create jobs and manufacturing in the United States, and in order to qualify for the tax credits Jake was talking about, much of the manufacturing activity and the economic activity has to be done either in the United States or in free trade partners or in neighboring countries. There's a lot of potential benefit to that, there are risks too, because you can't have a clean energy transition at the scale and speed we need without integrated global markets, without comparative advantage, without parts of the world are going to be better at making some things than others. And it is probably correct to maybe not think about China quite the same way we did 30 years ago in the formation of the WTO. But it is also the case that you need to, you can't have every country try to make the clean energy transition happen within its own borders. And what we're actually seeing today are countries that can't compete with $1 trillion in subsidies, that are worried they'll lose investment, and they're putting up roadblocks, they're putting up tariffs, they're putting up barriers. So Indonesia says we're going to ban the export of raw nickel. Maybe we'll ban the export of refined and processed nickel because we want the battery manufacturing to all happen here. But if every country sets up trade barriers and restrictions that require everything to be done within their borders, you're going to raise the cost of the transition and slow it down. So what we need to do is find a way to think about, the US and Europe are talking about a climate club, cooperation on things like green steel and aluminum that might raise the bar and encourage others to join while remaining committed to some form of global economic integration. We're going to need somewhere between, according to the International Energy Agency, $1.5 to $2 trillion by 2030 into the clean energy transition in emerging and developing economies, compared to $250 billion this year. I mean, just several-fold more in parts of the world where there are a lot of challenges to putting capital to work. We need to overcome those in ways that benefit those local economies. Don't just go and extract critical mineral resources to bring halfway around the world for refining and processing, but simultaneously might think about the enormous economic opportunities that will be created for US firms, for the technologies, the services that could be needed by export. In the same way that, the Marshall Plan, right? Like after World War II was not purely about charity and altruism, it was about rebuilding Europe economically because it was in the geostrategic and geoeconomic interest of the United States to have a strong and healthy European economy. There are opportunities to do the same, particularly in the emerging and developing economies where we need much, much more capital invested in the clean energy economy, and there are just huge barriers to putting that to work. And again, what we're seeing now is things going in the other direction. You saw this, you've been at the climate meetings in Dubai and Sharm el-Sheikh, rising, not reduced tensions between between developed and developing countries over a sense of unfairness, a sense of hypocrisy and resentment for how this clean energy transition is unfolding, because some parts of the world are at risk of being left behind.
So you go to a lot of climate conferences and energy conferences, but you also go to a lot of national security conferences. And when you go to places like the Munich Security Forum, are there climate people that are involved in those conversations? And are the people working on national security and international security around the world, are they thinking about the physical impacts of climate change and how that's going to impact national security and international security?
Somewhat, but not enough. It's a major focus of what we do at the Center on Global Energy Policy and the Institute of Global Politics that our dean at the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia and Secretary Hillary Clinton created recently. And we have a joint initiative on the geopolitics of climate change and the energy transition, precisely to try to bring these communities together. For all the reasons I talked about, and we could talk much more about it, obviously, making sure that the urgency, the opportunities, the messiness, the potential geopolitical complications, as well as the risks of the physical impacts of climate change themselves. A melting Arctic and what that might mean for military competition between the US and China and other great powers, competition for resources. You see it around the world today with drought, then flooding in the Himalayas, and cooperation historically to some extent between India and Pakistan breaking down. You see it impacting energy security, where historic low water levels are complicating passage through the Panama Canal for shipping at the same time that nobody wants to ship things through the Red Sea because of conflict with the Houthis is having significant economic impacts. In the Mekong Delta, where Chinese dams are creating downstream water risks, competition rather than cooperation for resources. So I think the conversation is broadly understood that climate change is going to mean more migration, more refugees, more conflict over water, but it's still superficial, it's still seen as too far off. And understandable if you're in the Situation Room every day and you're thinking about national security with Israel and Gaza and Russia and Ukraine, and we got a ton of problems every morning on the list of things to focus on. But I do think it's important that national security leaders understand climate change to be a more pressing, more today, more urgent issue than is the case today. And conversely, settings like this one, or the climate meeting in Dubai, or something else, I appreciate the invitation to be here as someone who thinks about foreign policy, and I think we need more of that as well.
So one of the themes that we have been hearing about this week that sort of bubbled up to the top is, what if we get this right? And so from your perspective, what does the year 2050 look like if we do the right things in the energy transition, if we do the right things geopolitically? What does that look like in the future, that envisioned future?
It's, well, certainly one where emissions are, if not net zero, a small fraction of what they are today. It is, as I said in the beginning, there are energy security risks to this transition, whether it is a mismatch between the decline in oil supply and the decline in oil demand that lead to tight markets, and you might strengthen the hand of geopolitical actors like Saudi or Qatar before in the long run it's diminished. There could be new risks from clean energy sources, particularly, say, critical minerals, where, as people may know, 80–90% of most minerals are refined and processed in China. That's about the multi-decade process of transition. Like, getting from here to there is going to be difficult and complicated. We often think about the end state. What does net zero look like? Hopefully we get close to that or all the way there. And when we get there, I think it is a world, as I said earlier, that is more energy secure. A lot of energy security risks today come from global trade. A decarbonized world, we know, will be one that is much more electrified. Electricity tends to be produced and consumed more locally. According to the International Energy Agency, global energy-related trade is around 40% of what it is today in a world that gets to net zero. So that has energy security benefits that can reduce the potential for geopolitical conflict. And hopefully it's one where there is cooperation. It doesn't matter where, for example, we know we need a lot of renewable energy. We know that we probably need some amount of negative emissions. And you can think about technology that might remove, say, CO2 from the air. It doesn't matter where that happens. Any ton of CO2 removed contributes equally. Right now, I recently visited a plant in Iceland. And why Iceland? Because they have really cheap renewable energy, geothermal, and they have really good geologic storage capacity. You know where else has that? Is the Rift Valley in Kenya. So what if countries that are wealthier and had historically contributed the bulk of the emissions thought about where to deploy some of these technologies globally that improved cooperation between rich and poor countries, created economic opportunities in parts of the world that historically have been targets of investment for extraction? We can think about being targets of investment for clean energy solutions. Another example might be low carbon hydrogen, whether it's green hydrogen or maybe even geologic naturally occurring hydrogen. We'll see if that works. It won't necessarily make sense to produce that, say, in North Africa, where there's a lot of low-cost solar, and ship hydrogen as ammonia halfway around the world to be used to make steel somewhere else. You might just move the steel making to where the low-cost hydrogen is. Again, creating economic opportunities for parts of the world that don't have it today. That would be an optimistic version. But there are pessimistic ones too, and I worry that in some respects we may be headed for some of those today if we don't pay attention to it.
So last question. I'm from New Jersey, and I understand that—
So is my wife.
And I understand you're a big Bruce Springsteen fan.
He's from New Jersey.
He is from New Jersey. If the energy transition were Bruce Springsteen lyrics, what would they be?
That's such a challenging question. He has a song, Waiting on a Sunny Day, which I guess is what we need to do to balance the intermittency with renewables. But there's I think, a lyric, or not the chorus, a lyric in Badlands. You spend your life waiting for a moment that just won't come. Well, don't spend your time waiting. So that's sort of what we all need to do when we think about what it takes to accelerate this transition, is kind of just get on it and get our hands dirty and pick up whatever piece we can contribute to. Don't spend our time waiting, just try to make it happen.
So everyone needs to leave here today and go make it happen, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
And now for an announcement. Danielle Boson and Karen Baker.
Hello. My name is Danielle Boson. I'm the Vice President of Policy Programs, Director of the Arts Program at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. And before I came to this role, I actually spent the bulk of my career as a climate wonk and advocate, and I loved that work, but I was always stymied at how we could reach people who never thought about climate change and make them part of the solutions that we needed to help our planet. At the same time, I've always loved the way that art can communicate to us. I think of art as humankind's primal language. Through a song or a visual piece, a story, an artist can broadly and brilliantly explain the predicaments we're in and show us the future that we want to see. I, however, contain zero artistic talent. And so I thought to myself, how can the Aspen Institute use its strengths, policy expertise, leadership programs, dialogue to action methodology that we've all seen here today and for the past few days in Miami, and how can we use that as a tool for artists to help inform, educate, uplift their work so that artists can tell their climate stories to an even greater public? And while I was thinking about how to do this, I had the good fortune to meet Karen Baker.
Thank you, Danielle. So I'm Karen Baker. I'm the co-founder and board president of Social Art and Culture. We have been in Washington, D.C., founded since 2009. We've been using the power of the arts to create social change, to educate and advance marginalized and underserved communities. So Social Art and Culture, in collaboration with the arts program at Aspen, are excited to announce the Environmental Justice Artivist Fellowship. So through an extensive 1 year of time, we have selected 9 distinguished fellows who are here today from DC, Maryland, and Virginia. They'll be focused on 5 areas: clean water, water quality, as well as clean air. They'll be focused on equity in food systems, clean energy, and land and pollution. So they'll be focused on that for 9 months, kicking off here at Aspen Ideas. Climate was their kickoff as well, so they're very excited to be part of this. And then they will be focused on 3 distinct areas within Washington, D.C., and their focus will be to look at the most vulnerable climate issues and environmental injustice issues within those communities. So if you know anything about D.C., we call them wards. So they'll be focused on wards 5, 7, and 8 in Washington, D.C. over these 9 months. So real quickly, please join me in welcoming the 9 fellows. Can they stand? So I'll quickly leave you with this quote: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring in a folding chair. That was Shirley Chisholm. So we're bringing our folding chairs to your table in order to be part of climate solutions, to impact climate injustice, and we're also going to build our own table. But the difference with this table is you won't need to bring a seat because there'll be already one available to you. Thank you.
And now, Bodhi Patil.
Inhale, exhale. Now take another breath in rhythm with this cactus coral that is native to Miami. This video was created by Coral Morphologic, a multifaceted platform for developing symbiosis between humans and corals, what we need for the future of ocean conservation. Clicker, next slide. Boom. The ocean provides the majority of oxygen that we breathe on this planet, including every second breath we take. She's our largest carbon sink, covering over 70% of the planet. She's the reason why our Earth's temperature and climate is regulated, controls all of our global currents and weather patterns, and is facing all sorts of extreme threats. That means next slide. Mother Ocean keeps all of humanity and global biodiversity alive, yet she's facing all sorts of extremely toxic pollution issues, illegal unidentified overfishing, and all sorts of stress that affects human biodiversity and the ocean alike. There's no doubt that the responsibility to heal the ocean falls on my generation, the 1.6 members of Gen Z between the ages of 16 to 24 who rely on the ocean and all that she provides, like everyone here. The only way we can truly heal and regenerate our ocean is when we learn from our indigenous elders and channel the wisdom of our ancestors to inform new age conservation solutions. Science has proven that all life has evolved from the ocean. In many Polynesian cultures, the coral polyp, this little animal that you can see here in the video by Coral Morphologic, is the origin of the deep sea. In Hawaiian culture, the kumalipo, or creation chant, is a sign that all life has evolved from the darkness of Po and come up to create the light. Coral reefs are critically important ecosystems, providing over 25% of marine biodiversity and being one of the most critical habitats. I fell in love with coral reefs at the age of 4. After snorkeling with my dad in Bali, Indonesia, where we lived at the time, and realizing that these reefs and these fish and these beautiful sea creatures were not only my friends, they were my kin, they were my family, and we had to protect them. And coming out of the water that day, I put my hand up and said, Mom, Dad, I'm gonna protect the ocean, this is what I'm gonna do. And I'm really, really proud to say that I made my little childhood self happy. And that's exactly following up on ocean justice commitments, working now at the highest levels with the United Nations on ocean governance, stewardship, literacy, climate policy, and most importantly, figuring out how to oceanize the world. In fact, we're all ocean people, and we've all come from the ocean, and the ocean faces a $1.5 billion funding gap, so we do all need to come together to invest in her, to fund her for the future of humankind. Thanks to Vocal Media at COP28 and the US State Department, I got to interview Brenda Mallory, the first African-American chair on the Council of Environmental Quality. She recently released the Ocean Justice Strategy, which I'm really excited to share more about with you all today. The ocean justice movement focuses on addressing environmental justice concerns related to the use of the ocean for economic, cultural, spiritual, food provisions, and recreational purposes, along with much more. Our nation's coasts are home to about 40% of the US population, and the ocean's benefits extend either further upstream. Yesterday, during the beach cleanup, a girl from Kansas told me how connected to the ocean she was, through the riverways, through the experiences she has with the Mississippi River and all sorts of other water bodies flowing into larger estuaries that eventually reach the ocean. Everything is connected to the ocean, and that's why we all have a role to play in accelerating ocean justice and ocean climate action. The ocean is the beating blue heart of humanity, and I can feel and channel her pulse. Literally with every step, with every breath, you take, I take, we take together. We need to understand that the ocean is creating this. And the Heart of Okeanos, developed at the intersection of art, science, and technology by Petro Cesti, recreated the biology of the heart of a blue whale, the largest heart of the animal kingdom. Pretty cool. The Heart of Okeanos will be brought back to life by seeding it with supercorals from the Urban Coral Lab and helping to create teeming biodiversity back in a marine ecosystem just off 600 feet off the coast of South Beach here. We will be rebuilding a reef that once was by seeding the sculpture with living corals and helping Reefline's vision accelerate marine habitats with purpose-built, climate-resistant reefs. The Reefline is a creative ocean solution that can be among Florida's great next blue economy attraction, bringing the triple bottom line benefits of ecological restoration, economic growth, and a higher quality, particularly to the communities most proximate to it. The global ocean economy is projected to reach $3 trillion by 2030, according to the OECD. And according to the Middlebury Institute for Economic Development and International Studies, America's blue economy is worth nearly $373 billion, with tourism and recreation being the top industry to people's quality of life, providing more than 1 million jobs created by ocean activities here in the state of Florida. Miami is home to pioneering supercorals that demonstrate to us that through adaptation to adversity, we reveal our greatest strengths. A lot of inner city and kids in Miami will never have the chance to do what I get to do and see this underwater world, connect with the local biodiversity beneath the surface. And the Coral City Camera, Ocean Rescue Alliance, and Coral Morphologic and the Reefline come together to build civic pride by enabling everyone to get underwater and connect with these beautiful ecosystems. If we protect what we love, then the Coral City, Miami, has the opportunity to be the largest beacon of ocean tech innovation in the world. No ocean, no climate, no life. Healthy ocean, healthy climate, abundant biodiversity, bustling human societies. Coral reefs are the rainforests of the sea. They are the original real estate developers on planet Earth, building complex ecosystems that demonstrate that it's possible that diverse communities can all live together symbiotically. We have to recognize that we aren't above nature, we are a part of it too. And we need to build symbiotic relationships between elders and youth, humans and corals, and learn from nature's indigenous guardians that both interspecies and interdisciplinary and intergenerational collaboration is necessary to regenerate the ocean and get to the future that when we all close our eyes, we envision. Through the power of art, we are reconnecting our hearts to the ocean. Now I want you all to get up, stand up, go ahead and make your big heart as you put it up, and go ahead and give it to the world, give it to those around you. Feel free to make a heart with your neighbor on both sides if you'd like, and make sure that regardless of what we do, whatever field in climate innovation you're working on, you lead with love. Because when you lead with love, when you channel your family and your ancestors, we get to systemic change. Thank you all so much, and remember that it's all about the heart.
Please welcome Dan Porterfield, Dan Gelber, and Francis Suarez.
Look out. Watch out. Watch out. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Dan Gelber. I'm a former mayor of this wonderful city. At the end here is Dan Porterfield, the other Dan, who is the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, the convener. And we brought with us a Aspen Fellow. You are an Aspen Fellow.
This is true.
Who also happens to be the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're gonna bring this thing home. This is the final session. It'll be brief, but we're going to talk a little bit about what's been happening and, more importantly, what happens next. Over 3 years since we started this, Dan, we've had 6,000 people have come to Aspen Ideas Miami Beach. We've had probably 120 sessions, conversations here. We've had 500 young leaders, and we've had an innumerable mosaic of conversations that have led to other conversations that have led to action. And of course, we've had millions of imprints on social media. So the question I have for you all, first of all, thank you, Dan, for bringing Aspen Institute Climate to Miami Beach. Thank you.
Thank you, William.
And I want to thank Mayor Suarez, because we met all 4 years ago and said, will we do this? And Mayor Suarez was president of the Conference of Mayors nationally, and made a commitment to bring mayors here also, so that, and we had about 60 here this last 3 days, so that they could bring back to their communities what they learned and also help other cities see what they've done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayors, both of you, and Mayor Levine Cava as well.
It's been a great honor for the Aspen Institute. Each of these years, the convenings have been different, new topics, new speakers, new solutions. I'm so proud of our energy and environment team, led by Greg Gersheni, our public programs team, and all of the Aspen colleagues, including our many trustees who've been supportive and made this possible. And I do want to call out also Alex Heckler and Michelle Berger, who have coordinated the planning committee. So this is just the beginning, I hope. It's just been spectacular again this year, and thank you, Mayor.
Sure. So Mayor Suarez, who is a better basketball player, me or Dan Porterfield?
I don't know what this has to do about climate.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's talk then about talk about the future then.
Well, look, I think for us, we like to think of the environment as intertwined with the economy. We like to say that the economy is the environment is the economy. We think it's a false dichotomy to have to choose one or the other. And everything from our drinking water to our Everglades to our reef system, so much of ecotourism, so much of our sustainability and viability comes from our environment. And so, I mean, I've been very blessed. I was the only mayor and still the only mayor selected on the Global Commission on Adaptation. And then, as you said, prior to being president of the Conference of Mayors, I was blessed to be named the chair of the Environment Committee, which then I passed on to you. So yes. You could be chair of the Environment Committee. And I think the reason why is because many people saw Miami as the epicenter for the climate crisis, but also the epicenter for climate solutions. And so I remember when we brought former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to Miami, he came down here and he was astonished at some of the things that we were implementing or we had implemented in both of our cities. In the case of Miami, FEMA actually reduced our flood risk. And so our flood premiums went down by 8% based on some of the actions that we took through our Miami Forever bond, which, as you mentioned in the back, you know, Miamians are not typically pro-taxation, right? So
self-taxation.
Self-taxation. So for them to vote for a self-imposed tax that would give them the resources to combine with state and federal funds to try to deal with the issues that we see day in and day out, I think it's a real signal to how mature this community is, how conscientious it is about this issue, and how we are looking towards the future, right? We are looking towards, you know, my children's generation. My son is 10 years old, my daughter's 5, and you know, I want to make sure that they have a Miami. We call it a Miami Forever. We want to make sure they have a Miami that's here forever and for all of them.
That's great. That's beautifully said. Dan, how are you? I mean, Aspen, I always tease you, is solving the greatest problems the world has ever confronted. Literally, it says so on their website. What do you see next for this, and also as for the climate space for Aspen and what you want to do?
Well, certainly on the climate issue writ large, we see it as one of the dominant themes we will continue to lean into and grow over the years to come. You know, partly because we've been here now for 3 years, we've met so many partners who have joined us or who we've joined in work that's around education or around removing plastics from the ocean, or is around supporting entrepreneurs and those that finance them in bringing to market opportunities that can make a difference. So we're going to accelerate that work for sure. Now, more specifically, we would love to continue being here and build this into, I think it's already one of the preeminent climate convenings in the country. What more can we do with it together in partnership with the Miami community, the business community, the foundation community, all of you who are here? What next chapters can we write together? We're very much interested in continuing to build this.
You know, and we appreciate that because, frankly, my city, Miami Beach, where I was born and raised, is at sea level. It sees the sunny day flooding that happens in Miami as well. Sure. So my question is this. The two of you have two very interesting perspectives. You're putting together the case, and you are having to implement it. And so how do you see this and things like this as the key to create the argument for and the means to solve this problem, which I think we would agree is a solvable problem?
Well, I'll go first, but you're doing the real work. But I think that what we do is we bring people together, we bring them to the table in a spirit of optimism, community with a solutions priority. That's what Aspen is known for, is how do we bring people together from all walks of life so that they can together ignite their potential to build understanding And from that understanding, to find new possibilities and new solutions. And I think that some of the climate talk is all about what big companies or individual actors should do, and not enough about what communities can do together. If you want to build the political will, there needs to be a public will. If you want to build public will, people have to be able to get involved. There's all these young people that are here today. There's a group in the back that all came from Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania, 4 first-year students. They came down here because they want to be part of a solution. So we have to offer a framework where everybody can join. I think that's one of the things that we're best at.
Mayor Suarez?
Yeah, I think what we look at is, we look at this in 3 distinct buckets. Of course, sort of the crisis is these events that we see, right? Hurricanes, dry day flooding, and what we call rain bombs, which is sort of greater than usual rain events. And so these are things that we see, right? There's no debate. It's not a debate. Exactly. It's happening. We've got to deal with it. So we are reinforcing our infrastructure to manage that. I think the second part is we issued a carbon neutrality plan. So how do we work with the private sector? And as a public entity, we're a big entity. We're a $1 billion company with 4,500 employees and 4 labor unions. How do we work as a government ecosystem and as a private sector ecosystem to eliminate carbon, to be net neutral? And then I think the third thing that we look at is, and this came through in a BCG study that BCG donated to the city, particularly in the last couple of years, which is climate tech, right? What are we doing as a world to reverse? Right? We talk a lot about adaptation, mitigation, which is sort of to make less worse, less bad, right? Like, let's mitigate, let's make things less bad. And I think sometimes that's not ambitious enough. You know, I think we've got to like reverse what the damage that we've done. And I think that the concept of reversal in the context of climate tech is one that I think we can create a dynamic ecosystem. And look, when you're in this knowledge-based economy that we're metamorphosizing in, cities like us that are creating ecosystems where we want to have people experience prosperity and obviously and do well, a lot of that comes from innovation. And so we want to be the innovation capital of climate tech in the world.
You know, I love the way that you've been able to tie work to make progress on climate issues to the future of Miami, to the economy, to the future of young people. It's such a positive, let's do this message. And I think that is part of what's needed to activate collective action, is that people can visualize that together we can get a lot done.
So let me ask you, and you're a Republican mayor, I'm a Democratic mayor, we always have sort of been very like-minded on these issues. And Miami, which is a community really that's pretty evenly divided politically, even in these times when things are so highly charged and highly partisan, it seems that our community has not treated these issues as partisan issues. They've treated them really as let's get it done issues. We both did bonds that asked people to tax themselves by their own vote. So why do you think that happens? And I'd love your point, your vantage point as well, because you don't really play around in that sandbox, but you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I would just say that I think we treat our environment as a precious asset. And if you think of it as a precious asset, then I don't think you look at it from a partisan perspective, right? And again, this precious asset goes to our viability, right? And our sustainability and our livability, but it also goes to our economy, right? I mean, and I think that's something that maybe has been underappreciated in the discussion nationally, right? Not just from a disaster perspective, because it's often talked about it from a disaster perspective, but from just an ecotourism perspective. And the last thing I would say, and this came out in the study that we presented to the United Nations for the Global Commission, there's a good economic case to be made that for every dollar that you spend prophylactically, you save $7 to $8 in post-disaster. So I think part of the case we made to our residents, and we continue to make, is if we invest up front, we're going to save you a lot on the back end. We're going to save it to you in the form of premiums. We're going to save it to you in the form of, obviously damage, which doesn't only have an economic cost, but, I mean, any of you who have experienced a very, very bad hurricane know how awful it feels to be without power, right? Anyone knows. I mean, I've had mothers been, in the streets and had mothers tell me that their baby milk is spoiling. I mean, that's such a feeling of helplessness as a public official, vis-a-vis a parent that's your boss, that's your resident. So, you know, I think the more hardened our infrastructure is, the less of these incidents that we have, the less stress that we put on our community, not just economic stress.
You know, it's interesting, in our city, in Miami Beach, when we were raising our roads and doing our remediation so that we were able to avoid the flooding, we did a business case study where we had someone come in and analyze property values in areas that had been raised versus ones that had not yet been raised. And it made a very strong case that every place we did it had a better response to property appreciation than the other places, which our residents said, well, now I want it. Dan, we got a couple minutes left. Why don't you address the partisan issue? And before you do, I want to personally thank Mayor Suarez and Mayor Levine Cava, because frankly, 4 years ago when we met, and I said, and you said, we want to do this in Miami Beach, I said, well, I got some partners I got to talk to, and we all met numerous times, and it really was because of their leadership that this has happened. So Francis, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Daniela. And we have 2 minutes left of the entire conference, so why don't you give us the final farewell?
Well, I don't know if I have the final farewell. It's a little ominous. I would say on the question of inclusion, political inclusion, you know, it's just so important to engage the ideas and not try to figure out what you think somebody is because of what you think their party might be. For goodness sakes, the independents are growing faster than any party right now. So our approach has always been to bring people to the table, especially the business community, which often is not invited, even though they have so much to offer. And you have no idea who's what in the business community. You just know they're running a business. I just want to thank this group for your faith that it makes sense to come together to listen, learn, and then go act collectively. And all of us are on a journey to try to figure out, how can I make the best difference with the life I have in the world that I was so lucky to be a part of? So each of us has that service ethic, and you express that ethic by spending your time here in this room and in this convening, and then in the work you do that made this important to you. That goes for the two of you as well. And so I just want to say thank you, because that call to service is what brings us together as human beings and as a planet. And working together, convenings like this and all that comes after, we will make a great difference. So thank to all of you. Thank you too. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank
you. This concludes our session on the stage. Please check the Aspen Ideas